The morning sun painted the sky in soft shades of orange and pink as Judge Kesha Williams stepped out her car. She wore a simple navy blazer and comfortable pants, carrying her leather briefcase filled with today's case files. After 23 years on the bench, mornings like this felt routine. She had no idea this Tuesday would change everything. The courthouse stood before her, like a monument to justice. Its stone columns reached toward the sky, and the bronze doors gleamed in the early light. Kesha had walked up these steps thousands of times. She knew every crack in the pavement, every detail of the building. This was her courthouse. This was where she served. But someone else thought differently. Officer Martinez stood near the entrance, his arms crossed over his chest. He watched Kesha approach with narrowed eyes. In his mind, he saw exactly what he expected to see. A black woman in casual clothes, walking toward his courthouse. He didn't see a judge. He didn't see a woman with a Harvard law degree. He didn't see someone who had dedicated her life to justice. He saw what his prejudice told him to see. Kesha climbed the steps, her mind already on the cases waiting for her. The Peterson hearing was scheduled for 9 o'clock. She needed to review the final motions before then. She barely noticed the officer until he moved directly into her path. Martinez blocked her way completely. His face twisted into something ugly, something filled with contempt. He looked down at her, like she was dirt on his shoe. "Another ghetto rat trying to sneak in," he said, his voice dripping with hatred. Kesha stopped. Confusion crossed her face for just a moment. She had dealt with difficult people before, but this was her own courthouse. She reached for her identification, ready to clear up what she thought must be a simple misunderstanding. She never got the chance. Martinez's hand moved faster than she expected. The slap came hard and sudden. The sound echoed off the stone walls like a gunshot. Pain exploded across Kesha's face. Her head snapped to the side from the force. The world tilted for a moment. Her briefcase flew from her grip. It hit the steps and burst open. Legal documents scattered everywhere. Papers danced through the air like falling leaves. Case files she had worked on for weeks spread across the courthouse steps. 23 years of respect and dignity disappeared in a single violent moment. But Martinez wasn't finished. He grabbed her by the throat. His fingers dug into her skin. Kesha couldn't breathe. He lifted her slightly and slammed her back against the cold stone wall. Her head cracked against the hard surface. Stars burst behind her eyes. "Filthy animals like you belong in cages, not courthouses," Martinez hissed into her face. Kesha tried to speak. She tried to show her identification. She tried to tell him who she was. But his hands squeezed tighter around her throat. The words died before they could form. Martinez twisted her arms behind her back with brutal efficiency. This was a move he had practiced many times before. Metal handcuffs bit into Kesha's wrists. They clicked shut with a sound that seemed too loud, too final. Other officers appeared. Rodriguez and Thompson walked over slowly, grinning. They had seen Martinez do this before. They knew the routine. Instead of stopping him, instead of asking questions, they pulled out their phones. They started recording. They laughed. "Man, he's really going off on this one," Thompson said, zooming in with his camera. "Martinez knows what he's doing," Rodriguez replied, chuckling. "Probably just another welfare queen trying to scam the system." Their laughter mixed with the morning birds, singing in the trees. The contrast was sickening. Kesha's eyes stayed locked on something above the courthouse entrance. Through the pain, through the humiliation, through the fear, she could see it clearly. A bronze nameplate mounted on the wall. It read, "The Honorable Judge K. Williams presiding." 20 feet away from her own courtroom. 20 feet from her chambers. 20 feet from where she had served justice for over 2 decades. And she was being brutalized by the very system she had devoted her life to protecting. Martinez jerked her forward, dragging her toward the courthouse doors. Her feet stumbled on the steps. He didn't care. He pulled harder, enjoying his power, enjoying his control. "Let's go, criminal," he sneered. "Time to face justice." The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so horrible. Inside the courthouse, people stared. Court staff members Kesha had worked with for years looked confused. Some recognized her face, but Couldn't make sense of what they were seeing. Their judge in handcuffs? It didn't compute. But Martinez moved fast, and nobody questioned a police officer in the moment. He shoved her into a holding area. The purple bruise was already forming on her left cheek, where he had struck her. Her throat burned where his fingers had squeezed. Her wrists ached from the too tight handcuffs. But Kesha's expression remained calm. Her eyes stayed focused. She had seen this before, not to herself, but to countless others. She had heard stories exactly like this one in her courtroom. She had read police reports filled with lies. She had watched officers testify under oath and fabricate entire scenarios. She had sentenced men and women based on false evidence. But she had also spent 6 months working with the FBI. She had been building a case against systematic racism in the police department. She had been documenting patterns of abuse. And Officer Martinez's name had appeared again and again in her investigation. This morning wasn't random bad luck. This was karma catching up. This was a universe putting the right person in the right place at exactly the right time. Martinez had no idea what he had just done. He thought he had subdued another criminal. He thought he was doing his job. He thought the system would protect him the way it always had before. He was wrong. As Kesha sat in the holding area, her mind was already working. She was remembering every detail. Every word Martinez had spoken. Every action he had taken. Every witness who had stood by and done nothing. Every laugh from the other officers. Every moment was being stored in her memory, like evidence in a case file. Because that's exactly what this was. A case. And Judge Kesha Williams had just become both the victim and the judge. Martinez had assaulted the one person who had the power, the knowledge, and the authority to make sure he faced real consequences. The bruise on her cheek throbbed. The handcuffs cut into her skin. But behind her calm eyes, justice was already preparing its response. And Officer Martinez was about to learn a lesson he would never forget. The courtroom felt cold despite the warm morning sun streaming through the tall windows. Officer Martinez stood at the witness stand, his uniform pressed to perfection. His badge gleamed under the lights. He looked every bit the professional law enforcement officer. His posture was confident. His voice was steady. He had done this many times before. Judge Harrison sat behind the bench, a thin man in his 60s with gray hair and wire-rimmed glasses. He was filling in for the regular judge who was mysteriously absent this morning. He listened carefully as Martinez began his testimony, nodding along with every word. Martinez cleared his throat and began his performance. Your Honor, I was conducting routine security protocols when I encountered a suspicious individual attempting to breach courthouse security, he said smoothly. The words rolled off his tongue like a rehearsed script, because that's exactly what it was. A script he had used dozens of times before. At the defendant's table, Kesha Williams sat in handcuffs. The purple bruise on her left cheek had darkened. It stood out against her brown skin like a badge of shame, but she sat perfectly still. Her hands were folded in her lap. Her expression gave nothing away. She watched Martinez with calm, intelligent eyes. Martinez continued, warming to his story. The defendant was dressed inappropriately for court proceedings. She was carrying what appeared to be stolen legal documents. When I approached to investigate, she became verbally aggressive. He paused for effect, looking directly at Judge Harrison. She started using profanity, Your Honor, making threats. You know how these people get when they're confronted. 2 other officers sat in the gallery. Rodriguez and Thompson exchanged knowing looks. They had heard Martinez tell similar stories many times. Different faces, same script, different victims, same lies. The prosecutor, a middle-aged woman named Sandra Walsh, stood up. Officer Martinez, can you describe the defendant's behavior in more detail? Martinez nodded eagerly. She kept screaming about being someone important. These people always claimed to be lawyers or judges or senators. Anything to avoid accountability. I've seen this playbook before. Judge Harrison leaned forward, clearly engaged. Did she attempt to flee or resist arrest? Absolutely, Your Honor, Martinez replied without hesitation. The defendant became physically combative when I attempted to place her in protective custody. I was forced to use the minimum necessary force to ensure public safety. His hand trembled slightly as he spoke. It was the only crack in his polished performance. But nobody seemed to notice. The court stenographer's fingers flew across her machine. Every lie was being recorded. Every false word was becoming part of the official record. Martinez had no idea he was digging his own grave with every sentence. In the back row, a young law clerk frowned. Something was bothering her. Something about all this felt wrong. But she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Officer Rodriguez, the prosecutor called. Can you corroborate Officer Martinez's testimony? Rodriguez stood up, his uniform equally crisp and professional. Yes, ma'am. I witnessed the entire incident. The defendant was clearly attempting to circumvent security protocols. Officer Martinez handled the situation with remarkable professionalism. It was a lie. Rodriguez had only arrived after Martinez had already assaulted Kesha. But the lie came easily. Officers protected each other. That was the code. That was how things worked. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses. An alleged assault? What about the injuries? Martinez's jaw tightened. This was the tricky part, but he had prepared for this too. Your Honor, I used only the force necessary to subdue an aggressive individual who was threatening courthouse security. The defendant's injuries, if any, resulted from her own resistance to lawful commands. He pulled out his phone with a practice move. I have partial footage here, though unfortunately my body cam malfunctioned this morning. The lie was so smooth, so believable. Martinez had used the body cam excuse before. Equipment failed all the time, right? Nobody ever questioned it. He played a video on his phone. It showed Kesha from the middle of the confrontation, carefully edited to remove the initial assault. The video made it look like she was resisting. It made Martinez look like the hero. How convenient, Kesha murmured softly, speaking for the first time. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. I'm sorry. Nothing, Your Honor, Kesha replied calmly, but her eyes blazed with controlled fury. She was taking mental notes of everything. Every lie, every detail, every word that would soon come back to haunt Martinez. Martinez continued the performance, growing more confident with each passing minute. What we're seeing here is a classic case of someone playing the victim card after being caught breaking the law. She was trespassing on government property, carrying suspicious documents, and when confronted with her criminal behavior, she immediately claimed discrimination. The prosecutor nodded sympathetically. Officer Martinez, in your 15 years of service, have you encountered similar situations? Unfortunately, yes, Martinez said, his voice rising with righteous indignation. There's a pattern here. Certain individuals believe they're above the law. That rules don't apply to them. They use accusations of racism to deflect from their own criminal behavior. It's honestly insulting to the real victims of discrimination. Several people in the gallery nodded in agreement, mostly white courthouse employees who had heard similar narratives on the news and social media. It felt familiar. It felt comfortable. It felt true. The defendant claimed she would go to work. Martinez made air quotes mockingly. But she couldn't provide any employment verification, any identification, or any legitimate reason for being in a restricted area of the courthouse. Thompson, the third officer, stepped forward. If I may add, Your Honor, the defendant was carrying what appeared to be confidential legal documents. We suspect she may have been involved in some kind of identity theft or fraud scheme. Judge Harrison looked intrigued. Fraud scheme. Yes, sir. Martinez jumped back in, sensing momentum. These documents had judicial letterhead. Case numbers, sensitive information. No legitimate citizen would have access to materials like this. We believe she may have been planning to impersonate court personnel. The irony was so thick it was suffocating. But Martinez pressed on, completely oblivious. In my professional opinion, he concluded, this is simply another case of someone trying to game the system. She knows if she can make this about race, about alleged police brutality, she can distract from her actual crimes. It's a calculated manipulation of public sympathy. He turned to face Kesha directly. His eyes were cold and contemptuous. These people think they can just waltz into any building, any courtroom, any space they choose. And when they're stopped, They screamed discrimination. Well, not in my courthouse. The words hung in the air like poison. Several court staff members shifted uncomfortably. Others remained stone-faced. Prosecutor Walsh added, "Your Honor, the state recommends we proceed with charges of trespassing, resisting arrest, and assault on a police officer. The defendant's attempt to frame this as a civil rights issue is clearly a desperate defense strategy." Kesha Williams sat in the defendant's chair, calm and composed, while the courtroom buzzed with murmurs. The prosecutor, Martinez, paced in front of the jury, confident. He thought he had all the answers, that his testimony would be enough to convince everyone of Kesha's guilt. He did not know who he was truly facing. When the judge nodded, inviting Kesha to speak, she stood slowly. Her movement was steady, every eye in the room on her. She did not hesitate or fumble. She spoke with authority that filled the entire courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, her voice clear, "I would like to address several points in the record that are inaccurate and incomplete." Martinez blinked, slightly caught off guard. He had expected a nervous defendant, not someone who spoke like a lawyer or even like a judge. The courtroom went quiet. Kesha's eyes swept over the jury, then the temporary judge, before she continued. "First, I refer to the testimony given by Mr. Martinez. Several statements he made contradict established law and precedent. For instance, under Miranda v. Arizona, any statements made without proper advisement are inadmissible. Furthermore, according to Dauber v. Merrill Dow Pharmaceuticals, expert testimony must meet strict standards of reliability, which were not met in this case." Martinez tried to interrupt, but the judge held up a hand. Kesha ignored the protest and went on. "Additionally, Rule 403 of the Federal Rules of Evidence prohibits the admission of statements that are prejudicial, misleading, or irrelevant. Much of what Mr. Martinez presented falls under this rule. Therefore, it should be excluded from the record." The jurors leaned forward, listening intently. Some whispered each other, amazed at the level of legal knowledge coming from the defendant. Even the bailiff, standing stiffly near the door, squinted at her, recognition flickering across his face. Kesha reached into her briefcase and pulled out a stack of papers. "I formally request the immediate preservation of all courthouse security footage and body cam recordings relevant to this case. This includes footage from areas Mr. Martinez overlooked, such as the east hallway and the rear stairwell." A few jurors gasped softly. The idea that there was hidden evidence that could prove her point added weight to her argument. And Kesha added, almost casually, "All body cam recordings have automatic cloud backups. Any attempt to delete or tamper with them would constitute a federal offense. I expect these backups to be secured without exception." Martinez's face began to pale. He stammered, Your Honor, that footage." Kesha turned her gaze to the temporary judge, whose face had gone white. "Yes, Your Honor. The footage exists and is automatically backed up. It is a procedural requirement." The bailiff's eyes widened. He muttered under his breath, recognizing the truth in her words. "No, it can't be." Kesha stood taller, producing her judicial credentials from her briefcase. The polished ID reflected the bright courtroom lights. The temporary judge froze, staring at it. His hand twitched, and he whispered to himself, This isn't possible." "I am Judge Kesha Williams," she said, her tone calm but firm. "This courtroom has proceeded without proper oversight. The temporary measures in place were insufficient and have violated basic procedural law. I am requesting an immediate recess to address these violations." Whispers erupted in the courtroom. Jurors exchanged stunned glances. Martinez's confident demeanor began to crumble. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. His carefully prepared testimony was falling apart before everyone's eyes. Kesha moved toward the front of the courtroom. She walked with purpose, her heels clicking softly on the polished floor. "Furthermore," she continued, "any statements made by Mr. Martinez that were not recorded by the official cameras must be considered inadmissible. There is no legal authority for unverified testimony in this case." The temporary judge looked around, realizing the magnitude of the mistake. The bailiff's hands were shaking as he tried to maintain order. Even the spectators were leaning forward, sensing that something extraordinary was happening. Martinez tried to regain control. Objection! Your Honor, she's not the presiding judge here. Kesha did not flinch. The objection is noted, Mr. Martinez, but irrelevant. As a sitting judge, I am fully authorized to ensure that all legal procedures are correctly followed. The failure to preserve evidence and the oversight in court security constitutes a serious breach. A murmur spread across the courtroom. Even some of the court staff were whispering to each other, astonished. Kesha's calm, authoritative manner made her words undeniable. Martinez sank into his chair, rubbing his face. He looked around desperately, trying to find support from the temporary judge, but found none. The judge's face remained pale, his lips pressed tightly together. He realized the trial had become a disaster from which he could not recover. Kesha turned to the jury, her gaze steady and commanding. Members of the jury, the law exists to protect fairness and justice. Any deviation from proper procedure undermines the integrity of this courtroom. I expect all proper steps to be taken before this case proceeds further. By now, the courtroom was in chaos. Phones were quietly recording. Spectators whispered excitedly. The bailiff, finally recognizing the judge before him, stammered, "Everyone, please remain calm." Kesha returned to her seat, sitting with the same calm she had shown from beginning. Martinez fidgeted nervously. His confidence had vanished, replaced by fear and disbelief. The temporary judge banged his gavel weakly. We will take a recess," he stammered. The spectators began to leave the courtroom in small groups, talking among themselves. Some staff members hurried to secure the evidence Kesha had requested. The bailiff stood near her, eyes still wide in recognition. Kesha remained composed, a picture of authority and intelligence. Her legal knowledge had turned the entire trial upside down in a matter of minutes. Every flaw in Martinez's testimony had been exposed. Every procedural error had been highlighted. The courtroom was hers, though she remained seated, silent but commanding. Martinez could do nothing. He had underestimated her completely. He had thought she was just another defendant, nervous and unprepared. Instead, she had revealed herself to be a master of the law, a judge who knew every rule, every case, and every safeguard. The temporary judge finally cleared his throat. "Court is in recess," he said shakily, banging the gavel. People began filing out, whispers and gasps filling the air. Kesha watched them go, calm and collected, knowing she had just turned the courtroom into a lesson in justice. As the doors closed behind the last of the spectators, Kesha leaned back in her chair. Her eyes were steady, her expression unreadable. Martinez sat slumped, defeated, the weight of his mistakes pressing down on him. The courtroom was silent now, except for the soft footsteps of the bailiff, securing evidence, and the distant hum of the building. Kesha's brilliant defense had done what no one expected. It had exposed the truth, shattered a false narrative, and reminded everyone present that the law could not be bent, ignored, or underestimated. She was not just a defendant. She was a guardian of justice in that room, and everyone there had seen it. The courtroom fell silent as Bailiff Henderson stepped forward, his voice ringing out with authority. "All rise." The Honorable Judge Kesha Williams presiding. Every person in the room froze. Martinez's confident expression vanished instantly, replaced by a cold dread that spread down his spine. He had assumed this was a simple trial, a routine hearing, but the announcement made it clear. He was facing someone far beyond his expectations. The doors opened, and Kesha Williams entered, her judicial robes flowing with purpose. Every step she took resonated with authority. Her eyes scanned the courtroom, calm, steady, and unyielding. She ascended the steps to the bench and took her seat, the wooden gavel in front of her symbolizing the full weight of the law. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Spectators, jury members, and staff alike could feel the power in her presence. Martinez's blood ran cold. The arrogance he had carried all morning vanished as he realized the depth of the mistake he had made. He had underestimated Kesha Williams. She was not only a master of the law, she was a law in that room. Without a word, Kesha tapped a few commands on the bench monitor. The large screen behind her flickered to life. Crystal clear security footage filled the room. Every movement, every action of Martinez's earlier assault was visible. His aggressive stance, his slurs, and his attempts to manipulate the situation were undeniable. The jury leaned forward, and even the spectators gasped softly, unable to look away. Kesha's voice broke the silence, calm and firm. This footage demonstrates the actions of Mr. Martinez. His assault was unprovoked, and his statements were false. But this is not an isolated incident. She gestured toward a second screen. Instantly, body cam footage from secure cloud backups appeared. Every slur, every false accusation, and every act of misconduct was captured, preserved, and now displayed for all to see. The room erupted in whispers. Witnesses who had suffered under Martinez's authority leaned forward, some shaking their heads in disbelief. The jury members exchanged stunned glances, and Martinez tried to speak, but no words emerged. He was frozen, unable to respond to the overwhelming evidence presented before him. Kesha continued, her voice unwavering. Over the past 15 years, Mr. Martinez has faced 47 complaints regarding misconduct. He has made 1,089 arrests, 87% of which involved people of color. 432 of those cases were dismissed, and his actions have cost taxpayers over $2 million in settlements. This pattern demonstrates a clear abuse of power and racial bias. Martinez's face went pale. His confident, smug demeanor was gone, replaced by panic. The weight of accountability pressed down on him, and he slumped slightly in his seat. The spectators murmured quietly among themselves, the numbers and facts striking like a hammer. Kesha tapped another command. The footage zoomed in on moments Martinez had assumed were unseen. Cameras in hallways, stairwells, and courtrooms had captured every act. The cloud backups ensured nothing had been deleted or altered. There is no hiding from the truth, Kesha said calmly. Every action, every word, every false claim is preserved and now visible to this courtroom. Martinez tried again to regain control, his voice shaking. Your Honor, this footage. Kesha held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. The footage is factual, Mr. Martinez. It cannot be disputed. Your prior attempts to manipulate evidence or testimony are now fully revealed. The law does not allow for partial truths or selective memory. The jury gasped. Spectators whispered, and even the court staff exchanged stunned glances. The courtroom, once dominated by Martinez's arrogance, had shifted completely. Kesha was in full control, and every action she took reinforced her authority. She leaned slightly forward, her eyes locking on Martinez. Your 15-year career is now under full scrutiny. Every complaint, every settlement, every dismissal, and every biased arrest is accounted for. The evidence is clear. Your pattern of misconduct is undeniable. Martinez trembled. He tried to speak, but his voice cracked. He looked around, hoping for support, but found none. His colleagues avoided eye contact. The temporary judge from before sat stiffly in the corner, pale and silent, realizing that the chaos he had allowed was now fully public. Kesha turned back to the jury. Justice is not convenience. Justice is not intimidation. Justice is evidence, law, and accountability. Today, Mr. Martinez faces a full reckoning for his actions. The screens displayed side-by-side footage, the assault, body cam recordings, and the summary of his 15-year career. 47 complaints, 1,089 arrests, 432 dismissed cases, and $2 million in settlements. The statistics hit like a wave, leaving the courtroom in stunned silence. Martinez's knees buckled slightly. He slumped into his chair, defeated. His career, built on false authority and abuse of power, was collapsing in real time. The spectators, many of whom had been affected by his actions, whispered excitedly, feeling a long-awaited sense of justice. Kesha did not gloat. She remained composed, a pillar of calm authority. Her robe symbolized not only her role, but the integrity and power of the law itself. Every detail had been preserved, every fact verified, and every injustice exposed. The courtroom buzzed with tension and awe. People who had suffered in silence now watched as accountability unfolded. The jury members shifted in their seats, realizing the depth of the misconduct. Witnesses nodded quietly, some wiping tears. Media cameras recorded every second, broadcasting the unprecedented courtroom event. Martinez's face was pale, beads of sweat forming at his temple. He had underestimated the law, underestimated Kesha Williams, and underestimated the reach of justice. The realization hit him fully. Everything he had built, every lie, every act of violence, and every career move based on intimidation was gone in an instant. Kesha's voice cut through the murmurs, calm and steady. The law is not blind to misconduct. It sees patterns, it values truth, and it protects the vulnerable. Mr. Martinez, your actions have violated these principles. Today, justice has caught up to you. He slumped completely, his arrogance replaced by despair. The courtroom watched in silence as a man who had once wielded power without question now faces complete reckoning. Spectators whispered, witnesses nodded, and even the staff, who once feared him, felt the satisfaction of accountability. Kesha remained seated, calm and resolute, her judicial robes draped around her, a symbol of authority and unwavering justice. Every eye in the courtroom was on her, recognizing not just her power, but the power of the law itself. She had turned the courtroom upside down, revealed the truth, and ensured that justice was seen, heard, and understood. As the screens continued to display the evidence, Martinez's defeat became undeniable. The spectator, jury, and staff had all witnessed history, a complete unraveling of corruption, bias, and abuse of authority, all orchestrated with precision by Judge Kesha Williams. The courtroom would remember this day for years to come. And through it all, Kesha remained composed, her gaze steady, her authority absolute, proving that in the face of misconduct and arrogance, justice always wears robes. The courtroom was filled with a tense silence as Judge Kesha Williams prepared to speak. Every eye was on her, from the jury to the spectators, to the staff who had worked tirelessly to ensure the trial ran fairly. Martinez sat in the defendant's chair, his posture slumped, his confidence completely gone. The arrogance he had carried into courtroom weeks before was replaced by fear, the weight of inevitable consequences pressing down on him. Kesha adjusted her robes and took a deep breath. Her calm authority filled the room. "Today," she began, her voice steady and clear, "this courtroom stands for justice. For too long, misconduct, abuse of power, and racial bias have been ignored. Today, we declare that ends." Martinez's hands clenched in his lap. His lips trembled, as though trying to speak, but no words would come. The spectators leaned forward, hanging on her every word. The tension in the room was almost tangible, and everyone understood the importance of what was about to happen. After carefully reviewing all evidence, testimony, and verified records, Kesha continued, "This court finds Mr. Martinez guilty of assault on a judicial officer, civil rights violations, and perjury. These crimes are severe. They have harmed countless individuals, especially those who relied on him for protection and justice." The courtroom gasped. Even Martinez's legal counsel could not hide their shock. The jury members exchanged glances, some nodding quietly. The weight of the verdict was unmistakable. Kesha paused, letting the significance sink in. The sentence must reflect the seriousness of these offenses and the need for accountability. Therefore, Mr. Martinez is hereby sentenced to 25 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. Furthermore, a full federal investigation will be conducted into every case he handled during his 15-year career. Any instance of misconduct, wrongful conviction, or abuse of power will be thoroughly examined. The courtroom murmured. Some spectators gasped, others whispered quietly. Martinez's face drained of color. He had hoped, perhaps, for leniency or some kind of escape, but there was none. Justice had arrived in full force. Kesha's eyes scanned the room, her gaze steady. Justice is not selective. Justice does not bend for power or position. Justice is guided by evidence, law, and accountability. Today, we demonstrate that no one, not even someone in a position of authority, is above the law. Slowly, the spectators began to rise. One by one, the room filled with standing applause. The jurors stood, clapping in recognition of the court's decision. Court staff joined in, and the sound of hands striking together echoed through the courtroom, a tribute to courage, integrity, and fairness. Martinez slumped further into his chair. Every attempt at intimidation, every lie, and every act of abuse had crumbled completely. 6 months later, the effects of that verdict rippled throughout the community. Federal investigators had completed their review of Martinez's cases. 12 officers were terminated for misconduct. Hundreds of cases were reopened, and dozens of wrongful convictions were overturned. Families who had suffered injustice finally received closure. The department was placed under federal oversight, ensuring that systemic problems would be addressed and future misconduct prevented. The courthouse itself became a symbol of accountability and courage. In the main hall, a bronze plaque was installed. It read simply, "Here, justice finally found its voice." Visitors, staff, and members of the community paused to read it. It was a lasting reminder that one courageous judge could transform an entire system, and that accountability could no longer be ignored. Martinez, confined to a federal prison cell, could no longer influence anyone or harm the public. His 15-year career of intimidation, abuse, and deceit had ended. His power was gone, and the law had claimed its due. The community he had once terrorized began to heal. Families celebrated overturned convictions, and the ripple effect of systemic change inspired hope and trust where fear and suspicion had once prevailed. Judge Kesha Williams continued her work with the same calm determination. Her courtroom became a place where fairness and integrity were respected above all. Her speech and verdict became legendary, not just for the punishment delivered, but for the message it sent. Abuse of power has consequences, and justice will not be silenced. People who had once been afraid to speak up now shared their experiences, knowing that the law could protect them. Communities once fractured by fear and injustice began to rebuild, strengthened by the knowledge that misconduct would be met with accountability. The overturned convictions brought relief and healing to those who had long suffered from wrongful accusations. The bronze plaque in the courthouse hall became a symbol of that transformation. Each visitor who read its message felt the weight and importance of justice. It reminded them that courage, integrity, and persistence could overcome even deeply entrenched abuse. Kesha's actions had set a precedent that would inspire others, showing that the law could confront and correct wrongdoing no matter how long it had persisted. Martinez's 25-year sentence was more than a punishment. It was a statement. Power and position do not grant immunity from the law. Those who abuse authority will be held accountable. The community had witnessed this truth firsthand. Families celebrated, wronged individuals received justice, and the police department, now under oversight, began a long but necessary process of reform. The courthouse, once just a building of stone and wood, became a living monument to accountability and fairness. Visitors walked its halls and saw the plaque, reflecting on the day when a bully was held responsible for his actions. The system, once corrupted by abuse, now carried a new message. Justice can prevail and law can protect the vulnerable. Judge Kesha Williams, though no longer in the media spotlight, remained a figure of courage and integrity. She knew that her work had delivered not just punishment, but also transformation. The people she had defended, the wrongs she had corrected, and the precedent she had set would endure for years. The community's faith in the law, shaken for so long, was restored. Martinez, powerless behind bars, could only reflect on his mistakes and the consequences that finally caught up to him. Meanwhile, families celebrated, lives were corrected, and communities began to trust again. Justice, delivered with skill, integrity, and courage, had changed everything. Years later, people would still speak of that courtroom, that day, and the judge who made it clear that no one is above the law. The bronze plaque stood as a lasting reminder. Courage and truth can overcome fear and injustice. Kesha Williams' legacy was not only in the punishment of one man, but in the transformation of an entire system, the restoration of trust, and the hope given to those who had long been silenced. In the end, justice had been delivered loudly and clearly in a courtroom where law and integrity prevailed. Martinez was no longer a threat. The community had healed, and the courthouse remained a symbol that one person's courage can bring lasting change. Justice had spoken, and this time no one could ignore it.